evening, all. Um, yeah, I'm not doing these episodes kind of on the same set day. I'm just kind of riffing with it. It's a bit jazz-like. But anyway, I couldn't let the recent news pass without comment, and let's delve into the whole Dominic Cummings affair. And if I have time, I'll touch on a couple of other things I've noticed. So I'm going to start off with something that might surprise some of you. The academic agent put out a video on the media's reaction to Dominic Cummings breaking the lockdown rules, allegedly breaking the lockdown rules. And it's very interesting. It's an interesting 7 minutes. I think he makes some good points because he is very good at understanding manipulative language tactics, something he is an expert in. And when I listened to Fake Accents Unite, the British was kind of giving the benefit of the doubt to the journalists. And I think the British is wrong on this. I think this is all about getting at Dominic Cummings because, he's generally moving or trying to move the Conservative Party more to a kind of what I would call mainstream proper right. Second of all, he got Brexit done. And third of all, if the pandemic hadn't happened, we'd be talking about revoking the licence fee, moving the BBC onto a different kind of funding platform. So they hate, I mean, it's obvious that they hate Dominic Cummings and they want to see him fall in a way that they... in a way that I don't think I've seen them want somebody else fall outside of Donald Trump, but certainly in the United Kingdom, they want Dominic Cummings to fall because he represents a threat to the fourth estate in this country. But I don't think he represents a threat to the fourth estate itself, the media. He is just against the way the media's current incarnation, the personalities involved, the mindset that's driving it at the moment, because it has, at the moment, UK television and radio news has veered away from what it used to be. It's and what its reputation had been built on. Now, I don't think Academic Agent went into the cause of this deeply enough, and I want to kind of fill in the gaps here. So, the problem happened about the 1990s. We had a generation of TV journalists and radio journalists who I would say politically were centrist. Not too left, certainly not on the right, but they did a pretty good job at suppressing their personal politics when doing their broadcast, because there was an attitude in British television for going back for decades that the audience is made up of people on the right, people on the left, people in the centre. And you couldn't veer too far. The newspapers could veer and become very partisan, but television had to stay in this kind of zone of being representative and trying to broadcast to the widest ideological demographic possible. Obviously, nothing far too extreme at either end, but sort of kind of trying to encompass the mainstream right, the mainstream left, and the centre. And so a lot of things they weren't partisan. The tendency to be partisan was suppressed, and it's no surprising that things started changing for the worse once the old guard had gone in the BBC. So Robin Day first. But I'm thinking more in terms of people like John Sargent and John Cole, if you remember, Master John Major and Mosses Thatcher, and Brian Walden. These people would ask very professional. They had a very professional demeanour. They would ask genuinely intelligent questions of both politicians on the left and on the right, and they had pretty good analysis skills. This has been lost when people like that were starting to be replaced by Andrew Marr, Nick Robinson, Justin Webb, and the example, Robert Peston. And when we saw that, I remember the Daily Politics, Andrew Neil, when he was just so annoying at interrupting people before they even got one word out. He was usually had a co-host who was fairly straight down the middle, typified by somebody like Daisy Sampson, who I think left to raise a family. And then what we ended up with was Laura Koonsberg, tittle tattle, somebody passed me in a corridor, unnamed source, and they went, so, and Peston is an example of, he is the embodiment of where British journalism on television and radio went wrong. Now, I'm going to do an anecdote here, but I think it illustrates the problem. So about 10 years ago, I'm at this party. It's the most normie party you could imagine, right? Just wall-to-wall normies, about 30 people there. Everybody's like politically on the fence, whatever. And I got chatting to one chap, and then as I was having a conversation with him, more and more people joined in. And it was interesting. They all didn't like Robert Peston. This was 10 years ago. And this chap I was talking to, he said, you know what Peston's biggest problem is that he engineered a news story. You see, he had a part to play in the financial crash. And he said, do you remember on the Today programme, he was sent out into the field to cover the Northern Rock story. So he went to the Northern Rock branch in Golders Green, London. And he waited just before the branch had opened, and he started saying to people who were waiting outside, waiting for the bank to open, did you know there's a run on the bank? No. Did you know there's a run on the bank? No. And people started going, what, there's a run on the bank? And he said, did you know there's a run on the bank? And I said, oh yeah, I remember that broadcast. And he said, you know what, things were bad for Northern Rock, but he kind of pushed it. He toppled that first domino by going up to people outside, talking about there's going to be a run on the bank. It was straight out of It's a Wonderful Life. A rumour starts a panic. And he says, that was Peston's shoddy journalism. Now, it just so happens that I was speaking to some people who worked in BBC Radio, and they couldn't stand Robert Peston. And they told me, when Peston came, nobody knew where he'd come from. But he did his first reports on the Today programme, and it was his delivery that was a problem. So he had that kind of very strangulated delivery, and he had to be sent away for voice coaching because it was a huge problem. And the public were complaining, and I think John Humphreys and some of the others were complaining that they couldn't understand him when he was doing his reporting. But none of this worked, no matter how much they sent him away for vocal coaching. It didn't seem to work. So the BBC producers ended up just saying, well, that's his unique selling point. The ums, ahs, and convoluted delivery. And it's just gone on from there as he's gone to ITV and television, and he's got no better. His rise to prominence is a mystery, and frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was revealed that he's a malfunctioning android. So, but he typifies where journalism has gone wrong. And there's another story that was written in the Times a few years ago by Matthew Paris. I know Matthew Paris has gone gaga recently, but he did write this one interesting thing where he said that the failure of British journalism back in the late 90s, early 2000s was a failure to scrutinise the Blair government properly. He said that when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown sold so much of Britain's gold reserves, it went reported, but it wasn't a big story at the time. And there wasn't analysis done, and there wasn't scrutiny done. Whoa, what's the effects going on here? And then we get the financial crash later on. And Paris was saying, had the press done its job properly, and scrutinised the workings of the Blair government a bit more, then perhaps that government wouldn't have got away with as much as it did, just unopposed. And the way Alistair Campbell controlled the media back then just had them on a short leash. And I remember at the time thinking that this is just not right. You know, yes, you have tough press secretaries to prime ministers or presidents, but nothing like Campbell. Just had the entire press corps eating out of the palm of his hand. That is not healthy for a democratic liberal society. But this was all taken as standard. And look at Campbell now. He's a media darling, a man who has erased, seemingly, if you follow his Twitter feed, he has erased the Iraq War and the death of Dr. David Kelly from his mind. I mean, the man is just brazen. And what's interesting, Academic Agent is right when he says that the journalists repeat each other, because I saw Adam Bolton saying, now on Twitter, he said, now special advisors are giving press conferences. Who'd have thought? And James O'Brien used almost exactly the same words. However, Alistair Campbell used to give press conferences, but they've forgotten about that. And other people have covered that, yes, it is possible to drive up to Durham on a full tank of petrol in a Land Rover Discovery. But then if you spend all your time being carted around by Uber or Addison Lee, you wouldn't know that in London. So, but the thing is that you know what the intentions of British journalists are because of their Twitter feed. If you're in any doubt about where so many prominent British journalists and political commentators, where their politics are, what their attitude is, just read their Twitter feed. In fact, you can make a case that journalists should not have Twitter feeds. Now, I don't want a draconian law on that, but if you are a journalist, don't have a Twitter feed. Unless you are one of those really opinionated people. But Adam Bolt and Kay Burley should not have Twitter feeds, because their personal feelings and politics on an issue should be suppressed. They should be old school. So British is wrong. You know, this is not a professional class. This is nothing but hatchet jobs. And it's happened over a 20-year period where the old standards have been replaced by a kind of gotcha. And the press thinking that they actually run things, or they should run things. This is why I was vehemently against proportional representation being introduced into the United Kingdom, because proportional representation would give the British mainstream media the power of kingmaker. They could snap of the fingers, a coalition falls apart. Snap of the fingers again, a new coalition is formed, in, out. The media would control it. They would demand heads roll at every turn. This is why we can't have this. This is why we have very strong, solid institutions. And at the moment, just by having brazen brass balls, you can rebuff the media, because technically our system is still pretty robust. But now I want to move it on. We now know the problem. What's the practical solution? Yes, everything now, when I sort of try and give my thoughts on the state of the world, the state of an issue, and what the problem is, I want to start thinking of solutions. Now, you might have some of your own. But this is something that is practical. It has to be practical. This is what I was saying in my previous video. We can't just come up with pie in the sky plans and dreams and fantasies. We have to think what is actually achievable. So we have mainstream media that is untrustworthy, manipulative, vindictive, thinks too highly of itself, and is contemptuous of the public, and isn't committed to honest reporting. So what can we do about it? Well, first of all, I think a lot of you are doing something about it right now because the ratings are low. Even amongst the normies are turning against the mainstream media. So you've got to keep that up. You know, don't put up with their nonsense. Don't feed the machine. Try and find where you can. It's going to be very difficult. Try and find those journalists, those reporters who you think are pretty honest. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to cite two names here, and one is blatantly right wing and an opinion piece, but I like James Delingpole a lot. I mean, sometimes, you know, we'll respond to each other's tweets on Twitter. It's so nice. It's so I kind of get a buzz when somebody of prominence just kind of takes the moment to talk to you on Twitter. But what I like about him is that he understands his limitations. Yes, he is, you know, very right wing, very conservative. I like a lot of his takes and things. I think he's a bit kind of visceral, but he knows that when he makes a mistake, he owns up to it. He takes things well on the chin. Yes, he is an opinion piece writer, but I just think that kind of self-awareness, and when he gets it wrong, he is prepared to be humble and admit that he's wrong. I like that. You know, if you may disagree with his politics, you may find him kind of rude and boorish at times, but at least he has that going for him. I personally, I don't find him rude, boorish, or you know, I agree with most of what he says. The other person I like, whose politics is very different, and I think he's good and bad, but again, he has self-awareness and he has a touch of humility about him, and he has a touch of knowing when something's right and when something's wrong, and that is Dan Hodges. Yes, he's a Blairite centre-left type, but he knows the limitations of his profession. He knows his personal limitations, and I've got to give respect for that. So I just want to single those two out for a special mention. But other than that, it's very difficult. But don't feed Ma, don't feed Peston, don't feed Kunzberg. You know, send their ratings down. That's the first step, because after a while, you know, the advertisers and people who back these things, you know, the money will dry up at some point, and once the lockdown's over and we can get back to reshaping the BBC, we can push on with that. Second of all, complain. Now, I've said this before, it's more effective than you think, but you've got to do it right. So every time you catch a journalist using this manipulative language, being dishonest, not representing, you should complain to the networks. And you go, oh, what good's this do? They're always going to defend their person. Well, complaints have to be logged. We have Ofcom, and complaints have to be logged. The more complaints they receive, the more they have to sit up and take notice. So what you can have declining ratings, ratings going down, the number of complaints going up, and it becomes more difficult to ignore. And these things do have an effect. Now, yes, news producers will close ranks, journalists will close ranks, but there is a level of people above that. And if they start seeing that certain journalists are more of a liability than an asset, and we see, you know, at the moment, the hatred towards Piers Morgan is growing. You know, hatred towards Piers Morgan is always fluctuating. He had a surge of popularity a few months ago, but it's plummeting. It's back to where he was when he was on the Daily Mirror, stuff like that. So yes, people like Piers Morgan are kind of on a slippery slope. And we've seen the Victoria Derbyshire show was cancelled because it had, in ratings terms, 0 viewers. And the plug's been pulled. And you can't, that shows that change can happen. Now, when writing, into complaint, and I do suggest you do this, I think it's a very, you might not think it has much of an effect, but it will have a cumulative effect. But you've got to write the letters of complaint, the emails of complaint, in a specific way. So the object here is to call out the dishonesty, to call out the bad journalism, to call out the poor performances of these journalists and reporters. Complain about their Twitter feed. You've got somebody who you think should be more impartial when presenting the news, and yet their Twitter feed shows that they can't be trusted. So at this moment, there's no point going after the opinion piece leaders like James O'Brien or Julia Hartley-Brewer, who, again, she fluctuates. You get good Julia, bad Julia. We got bad Julia at the moment. But some of these people that you don't like, or Mike Graham, if you don't like him, they're a different category because they are opinion piece. They are on the radio to give their opinions. And so there has to be a different strategy for them. But when you're looking at people like Adam Bolton, Kay Burley, Andrew Marr, they are expected to maintain a more unbiased opinion. They're supposed to be they're supposed to suppress their personal political leanings, and they're not doing it. So that's where you complain, and that's where you have to make don't sound like a ranting right winger. Don't use jargon. Just point out their most egregious faults that you can back up with, time, date. Make it sound like a normie when writing into complaint. Don't be Karen. Okay, just be, just saying, I think this is poor standards, shoddy journalism. If you can, point out where they got their facts wrong. And I've done this in the past. I have written to TV companies complaining about factual errors in journalism, and I get a response. I mean, if you write to the BBC, you are pretty certain that you will get a response, even if it's just a kind of cover their asses response, but you will get a response, which means the complaint has been logged. As I said, they log all these things. So you've got to keep up the pressure on them. This is something practical you can do. Don't feed the machine and complain wherever you get, where you find their behaviour is egregious and you've got grounds for a complaint. To do it. So until next time, we'll just see what other craziness is in the news. So until next time, take care.